Welcome to the Norwegian EV market, the battery car, the electric car paradise. Now, my name is Kent Anderson, and I'm a blogger and a podcaster here in Norway with my blog, Kent's Counterpoint. And you have heard a lot about the Norwegian EV miracle. Electric vehicles are simply taking over in Norway and everyone is buying them. And from the government and from the activists, you're hearing a lot of good and positive things about the EV cars. But what is actually the truth? Even the newspapers are telling me that EV cars are fantastic and every Norwegian wants them and everyone is buying them. Is that the truth? Yes, it is. But it's not that they really have a lot of choice. Now, how many EV cars are there in Norway? Well, a lot. 21% of all our cars rolling on the Norwegian streets are EV cars. Electric battery cars, no hydrogen cars, very few, at least just 3 or 4 or 5 of them. But the EV cars are everywhere. That's one over there. And there's one there, there's one there, and there's one Tesla over there, of course. Here's the Mercedes electric vehicle. So yeah, especially here in Norway, you can actually find EV cars everywhere. And they're really popular and they sell like hell. So the Norwegian EV miracle must be true then. Well, it's not that simple. You see, the Norwegian government has decided that from 2025, there won't be legal to sell a fuel car. No diesel cars, no petrol cars are allowed to be sold in Norway after 2025. The parliament has decided this, and it's an absolute solid case. Now, in EU, the same has been discussed in 2035, but it's not actually decided yet. So what's happening here in Norway is actually a car traffic revolution, a total revolution of our whole traffic picture. And the problem with that is that it's an experiment. Now, this experiment is good for the climate hysterics. They are good for the car salesmen. It's good for the car industry that are forced by European politicians to produce EV cars, battery cars. But it's not necessarily so good for the Norwegian public. Now, why are everyone buying these EV cars? Well, there's a very funny and a little understood factor behind this. It is that a car that would cost normally, let's say, $50,000 in another country, in Germany, that car will cost $100,000 here in Norway because of the extreme taxes on cars, which actually has made the Norwegian car park very old. I think the average age for a car in Norway is 19 years, which is very high, and that's because cars are very expensive. Now, by pure chance, since the cars we get to Norway are taxed so hard that they cost actually twice as much, this actually compensates for what is the cost of making an EV car, a battery car. They are approximately twice as expensive to produce as an ordinary car, like this. Here's an Audi e-tron Quattro. And this car, normally in Norway, with this car costs 1.2 million kroner. And here, it's approximately around 700,000 kroner, or around there, I guess. So Norwegians actually get these cars for free, tax-free. There are no VAT, there are no taxes, no nothing on battery cars. While buying a petrol car, you almost pay twice the price in VAT and taxes. And this is the reason why battery cars seem very cheap to Norwegians, but they aren't, not really. In Germany, of course, the battery cars, EV cars, will cost twice as much or almost twice as much as an ordinary petrol car or a diesel car, which actually makes them not very interesting. And there are other problems, of course, because Norway doesn't have really a lot of highways and not super speed highways like Germany. And you can't really drive a battery car at 130, 150 kilometers an hour for a long time. And you can't find anywhere to charge them in Germany. So the whole infrastructure in Germany isn't made for this. And yet, the reason why the Norwegian car market is so based on battery cars now is strictly because Norway is the most electrified country in the world. We have a lot of hydropower, and our houses are warmed with electric power. It's always been like that. We don't need gas. We produce a lot of gas out in the Northern Sea, but we don't need it. So we sell it to Europe because all the houses in Norway are already electrified, and we have abundance of electric power that used to be cheap, but now has become rather expensive because of a new system for selling power to EU. So we got the same prices as they have in EU. That's a battery car. That's not that's a fuel car. This actually means that even though the Norwegian market for cars are a success, and the EV car success is unquestionable because they sell a lot of cars, over 120,000 electric vehicles in Norway last year. The problems behind it are actually piling up because, first and foremost, people start to have problems with charging. They drive far because, the success is so big that they haven't really built enough chargers around, and the quality of EV cars are also somewhat questionable from some of the car manufacturers. There are a lot of problems with the new cars, and Tesla, which sells very well here in Norway, has had a lot of problems with service and bad reputation. So, of course, the problem is that Norwegian doesn't really have any choice anymore. If you go to a car dealer in Norway and say, well, I'm going to buy a petrol car, most of them will say, we don't have any anymore. You have to buy a used car. And that is why the used car market is starting to pile up, because the interest in Norway has now started to rise. People are getting poorer because of the COVID and because of high interest and inflation and everything. So people are now trying to sell their very expensive electric cars, which has been very popular. And now it's not so easy anymore. So the whole market is sort of not collapsing, but it's a bit sketchy. And that's a taxi. It's not an EV, because driving a taxi is rather hard. That's an electric. That's a battery car. This is a new Volkswagen ID.4, I think. It's a beautiful car. I mean, does battery cars work? Yes, they do. They're excellent cars, and they function very well, and they look well, and they drive really, really nice because they're very heavy, almost 2 tons. And the problem is, of course, that you have to charge them, and rather often. And they're heavy and they're expensive. And the biggest problem is actually not very well explained to the public. And that's, of course, the value loss of an electric car because of the battery, which is very, very expensive. Maybe $30,000 $20,000 around there. The battery has a guarantee of 8 to 10 years, all right? But the problem is that after the battery guarantee is out, you have absolutely no guarantee that this battery will last for another year, another month, or 10 years, and how much power you can get into it or out of it. So when this car doesn't have a guarantee anymore on the battery, it's actually no value at all, because the battery is then worth more than the car if you have to replace it. And that means that in a country where we used to, you know, the average age of a car was 19 years, that will maybe sink to 10 years because before the car is wrecked, which again means that people will have to buy twice as many cars. And of course, an EV car, they call it environmental friendly, but it's not. It's friendly for, it's good technology. I mean, a fuel car is absurdly complicated compared to an electric vehicle. I mean, electric vehicle has one, it doesn't have a gearbox, it doesn't have a clutch, it doesn't have an engine, doesn't have a lot of pressurized systems for oil and cooling or anything. It's just one motor, and that's that. So it's super simple. But the problem is the battery, of course, because that's heavy, and that represents actually an enormous increase in use of natural resources. To call this car, which uses a lot more natural resources to build than a fuel car, is ridiculous. This is a product. This is nothing, a car has nothing to do with environmental friendly or ecological or anything. A car is a car, okay? It's heavy, it's consumed. It's got leather seats, and it's got AC, and it weighs 2 tons of stuff that is made with energy. So a car is not in any way or form environmental friendly, unless you're concerned about CO2, which of course makes all plants green. So the whole thing is actually an experiment with our society. Norwegian politicians has decided that we are going to run in front of everyone. And of course, the European car manufacturers, they love this because they can't sell their EV cars in Germany. People won't buy them. Not in France, people won't buy them unless you give them away. So Norway is the only country where they really can sell a lot of these cars. And that's, of course, is an experiment for them too. But it's not the car manufacturers who pays for this experiment. It's actually the Norwegian car buyers who pays for making EV cars usable and to actually experiment to see if this is a viable way to make traffic in a country and make a country go around. There's Ioniq 5. So does it work? Well, yes, it does. But of course, if you buy a diesel car, you can drive 1,000 kilometers. You can charge it, fill it in 3 minutes. And you know, it has the same range when it's plus 50 or minus 50. So it has great advantages to buy a diesel car or a petrol car. And I usually ask people, here's a Fiat, here's an electric Fiat, yeah, Fiat 500. It's a fun car. It's a beautiful car, and you know, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, you know, maybe you can drive 20 miles with it, 50 miles. Maybe you can drive longer, but if it's cold, you can't. If you fill it up with a lot of people, you can't drive that far. You never know how far you get. So you always have this range nervousness. And, well, there are problems. I always ask people who drive an electric car, can you tell me what an electric car, a battery car, does better than a fueled car? And they say, well, oh, it's cheaper. No, it's not. Because if this car actually lasts only 10 years instead of and its value has no value after 10 years because of the battery guarantee, then you lost a lot of money. It's not cheap at all. It's more expensive to produce, much more expensive to produce than an ordinary car. And the funny thing here in Norway is, of course, that now that the sales of battery cars has actually plummeted, the car manufacturers, try not to get run over here. The car manufacturers, they are desperate to sell their cars, okay? They really need a market to sell their cars. And now they are dumping the prices like $10,000, $5,000. You can really have big discounts on the EV cars. And this is rather strange because the price for lithium and all the components you need to make these EV cars is actually skyrocketing in price because these resources are limited. They're in China, and you have to, freight them all over the world. And the European car manufacturers cannot lose control of this Norwegian car experiment, because this is a laboratory, and everyone who buys a car and drives a car, or an EV car, they're actually a lab rat. You are a lab rat in an experiment, and the car manufacturer can't lose control of this because, of course, all the resources are coming from China, most of them at least, and this means that the politicians in EU has opened up the Chinese market for Chinese cars in Europe, and that was never the case before. So that's a threat, direct threat against the European car manufacturers. And if you believe that many people believe this, that car manufacturers wanted to start to buy and produce electric cars, EV cars, right? Paper says so, and the politicians say so. Well, this is a great success, and everyone wanted to make them. That's not true. It's not true at all. It's not true at all. Porsche didn't want to produce the Taycan, the electric battery Porsche. They didn't want to produce it. They had to. They were ordered to by the politicians because of fleet emissions. Or else, if Volkswagen didn't start to make electric vehicles, they would get fined billions of dollars or euros. And this is, of course, something the car manufacturers shouldn't have bent to. They did, and they started to make the electric cars, even though there's not really a good market for it. So what we actually see here, even though it's a very beautiful cars, they are actually sort of kind of like the DDR, the Deutsche Demokratische Republic, the East German car, the Trabant, which politicians said, well, you are going to drive this car, you're going to make this car, and this is the best car you can make. And that's not really good marketing. That's not really good market theory, is it? That's not really a good way to run a democracy, okay? To decide what the producers are going to produce, what products they're going to produce, and no matter what the cost, and what kind of car you are supposed to buy. That is not worthy of a free society, at least in my book. So there are problems. And now, of course, Norway has had this EV boom for like over 10 years, and now old EV cars are starting to get difficult to sell because of the battery problems. And well, so yeah, it's a success, but it's a forced success. It's a political forced success that the politicians decided that it is going to be a success and we are going to go through with this, but they had no thought of consequences or the downsides of the whole experiment. And nobody really knows how this is going to end. We just know one thing, it is just the politicians won't budge. They won't say, oh, sorry, we were wrong. No. So from 2025 in Norway, they won't be able to buy diesel car or a new diesel car or a petrol car. And I don't think that's a good way to run a country. Not really. That's not really worthy of a democracy. So that's the truth about the Norwegian EV miracle. And of course, the bad things, the worst for Norwegians, which of course doesn't bother anyone else, is that from 2025, when there's not more possible to buy a new petrol car or a diesel car, the politicians most likely will reinstate all the taxes, the VAT on everything on new cars, which means that the prices of an EV car will explode, which again means that people can't afford new cars anymore, which means that used cars will be more worth, which means that the Norwegian car park will be cubified, like, you know, people will go to used cars and maintain them for as long as possible. So what the politicians actually has done is they have destabilized the whole car market, the whole traffic market. And again, they say this is going to be a success, but who takes the blame if it's not? Well, no one. So we'll see where it leads. But that's at least now you have a good insight to what has happened, how it's happened, and what's going on in Norway. Great cars, and of course they're better than they used to be in the 90s. They were possible because of better batteries, lighter batteries, and of course neodymium magnets, and these three, and the electric motors, brushless motors that are digitally controlled and more efficient. These three factors made this car usable and good. But I still say that a car is a car is a car, and the most important thing for people is to buy the car they need, not the car the politicians need them to buy, because that's not worthy of a democracy again. I don't think that's a good way to run a country. So that's all for now. Thank you for joining me, and share this video if you want to share the truth about the Norwegian EV market. Now you know more. My name is Kent Anderson. Thank you for listening.